So I asked them how I should do this, and I was going to talk a little bit about myself, but I really want to have a conversation with you. So how many of you are reading the book or have read the book? So most of you. All right, so we can talk about it. And how many of you are born and raised in New York City? All right. So that's where I think I wanted to start. So when I was growing up, the characters in this novel are around your age, the young women characters. But I grew up right outside of the city and always came to the city to try to be like you guys, cool city kids. So we would just like go to Chinatown, get our, faux name brand, threads, and try to emulate that style and that cool that we thought city kids had being in the suburbs. But then when I was working at the mall, a lot of the kids that would be shopping at the mall at the Palisades Center were from the city. So that was one of those things where I first had this idea of New York as a center for youth culture in a way that kind of just stayed with me throughout my adolescence into my adulthood when I started working with young people at a community organization called Make the Road by Walking. So this time period, do any of you really remember 2003, 2004? Vaguely? How old are you guys? Three, okay. So what does that mean? What's the average birth year in this group? 2000. 98.
I'm mid-century.
He's mid-century modern. I'm in the 80s. So 2000, that's when I graduated high school. So when you were born, I was going to high school. But one of the things that I always knew I wanted to do was I wanted to write a book. Are there any aspiring novelists or writers in here? Yeah? Yeah, Grace? Hi. Okay.
Come on, you guys.
Yeah, no shame. So I'm going to put it out to you. What do you think is the hardest thing about being a writer?
Writing. Like not giving up.
Not giving up, okay. And you're writing long form fiction, nonfiction, okay. Anyone else? What else is hard about writing? Yeah?
I feel like it's hard to know if what you write is good, if you're like the only one reading it.
Okay. How many of you write online? Your posts, blogging, sharing things in public? Yeah? So what do you think about that kind of?
I think that's a little different because you have like complete creative control over what you post.
That's very true. So that's actually something that I wanted to talk with you about, is how you think your thoughts are being shaped not only by your peers, but the internet as well. I mean, do you feel like that voice is very loud for you? Like the voice of the internet, the voice of public opinion when you're writing? Okay, so I've been feeling like that too, because when you write a novel, you're kind of in a hole by yourself, away from the world, pretty lonely, and you don't think anyone's going to read your book. Like, this is mind-blowing to think that young people in New York read your book. You can imagine being on that side of it. But for me, something I've really realized is that there's also this expectation for me to write on the internet and to write things that are more public and sharing a part of myself that's more personal. So it's kind of like you have this like work of fiction, but then you also have this life that's very public and very out there for people to dissect, which may or may not feel safe or good depending on what you're writing about. So anyway, so I went to college and I was a women's studies major. And are you guys all applying to colleges now, or?
Yeah.
This side is?
Yeah.
They're done. They're seniors.
Oh, you're all seniors. Okay. And this side is like juniors. You're a senior. So what do you look for when you're kind of applying for college? What's your location? So what do you look for in a location?
I wanted to go to a city, but I ended up doing the opposite and going to a college that's like far out in the middle of nowhere.
Where?
In Indiana, DePaul University.
Wow. So you're taking a leap of faith there.
Yeah.
Are you excited?
Yeah, I'm very excited. And also like what I want to study and stuff. So I decided to go to a liberal arts college, so I get like a big range of things to choose from.
So you have the world as your oyster pretty much. So that's taking a huge risk, right? And you're ready to go there because you're like, I've already conquered New York, so Indiana, here I come, right? Anybody else who has other college aspirations that they're kind of thinking about? Or is college not something you're thinking about and you want to work or do something else? Is anyone in that?
I should clarify that about a third of this group already is in college because we're in early college. And
So you're like, we're in college.
so then there's a lot of them have already applied and been accepted to transfer to their next school.
Okay, so who's excited about the next school? Yeah, what's your...
It's Beloit. I'm going to Wisconsin, so lots of cheese. That's my jam.
You're like, I chose it because I love cheese.
But also, there's like, my favorite thing was that there's a tea store next to a bookstore, next to a sushi place, and they're all like right there.
So you're just like, you're gonna be very like, you have your little setup right now. I think that's very important. It's quality of life, so that's cool. So the thing that I guess I wanted to talk to you guys about is that the characters in this novel, they're all coming from a very different place. You have Charu, right? So how would we describe Charu's character in this book? I'm not offended, don't worry. You can be like, he's really annoying, but anything you think. Anyone want to throw out adjectives?
And rebellious.
Rebellious. She's very rebellious for her family, right? Okay, anything else?
Independent.
Independent. What else?
Angsty.
What, fan?
Angsty.
Angsty. She's angsty. Yeah, she's pretty tortured, right? All right, what about Ella? Any adjectives? Yes.
I think she kind of feels like a misfit.
A misfit. Yep. Okay, anything else? And then you have Maya, right? Maya's kind of like in and out. What's her story? She's kind of like both in a way, right? She's a misfit and she's kind of angsty, but she's also more level-headed. Like she's like, why don't you guys have summer jobs and why are you all like staying around the house? So when I was thinking of this trio of young people, I was really thinking how these three characters are going to occupy a different sort of vibe in this group of friends. So we have Charu, who kind of, in some ways, represents my rebellious side because I did grow up in a pretty conservative Muslim family. And I had to rebel for just simple things like wearing a skirt. You know, it wasn't even like I was allowed to wear a skirt. The first time I had a slice of pepperoni pizza, I was like, this is heavenly, and how did they keep this for me? So I completely had these little things that were massive rebellions. My mother cried when she found out I had that slice of pepperoni pizza. Wow, right? It's kind of like, that's crazy, but that's not crazy for them because that's very much against their faith. But then I also had friends that were questioning their sexuality as I was. So one of the things that I really felt in high school, and back then, I mean, now gender and queer identity and being more androgynous, and that's pretty accepted even in a mainstream way. Like you'll have, you know, Willow or Jaden Smith that kind of embody this, like I don't have an identity that other people can put on me. You know, like I'm my own person. I didn't really feel that way. So when I was in high school, it was like, well, who am I? Am I bisexual? Am I queer? What's my identity? And we, my friends, kind of occupied this place of feeling kind of like misfits. So we did theater and literary magazine and fashion club, and we did all those things that you do when you just want to like express yourself, but you don't know how to do that. So you join clubs, right? Are you all active in clubs or after school things? Yeah, what kind of stuff do you guys do? Literary, exactly, right? You just write your feelings down.
Theater.
You're in theater? No. Oh, you're in theater.
Card club.
Art club?
Card.
Oh, card club. What is that?
We play Pokemon. Chinese poker, blackjack.
So make sure you're friends with her because she's going to be like poker queen and making lots of money. That's cool. Yeah?
We have I'm in the Super Smash Bros. Melee Club.
Whoa!
It's a video game. It's like a really old video game, and like we like play it in our school for fun, you know.
So you're allowed to play video games in this club. That's the club.
Yeah. So I guess like why it's like really open to like a lot of new ideas and new open clubs.
Okay, that's cool. Anybody on this side, after school stuff, interests?
We
Yeah.
have a sing program where we had two programs. They're kind of similar to each other, and one of them we associated with the Atlantic Theater Company, where
Ooh.
we had to write our own play and star in our own play.
Wow, that's huge. Okay, so that's like, you guys are doing a lot of different kinds of things, from creative expression to playing games and cards and video games. That's really cool.
Can I
Yeah.
put a plug in? There's actually a lot of people being modest here, but there are a lot of talented writers in my workshop classes right now.
Like Pulitzer Prize winning.
But they are going to be reading at the Astoria Bookshop a week on the 16th.
Oh, are you reading fiction
Some
or?
people are. Fiction, poetry, nonfiction.
Shameless advertising. Come
Yep,
support.
that's
I would love to. Yeah, you should totally be advertising. This is part of the horrible part of the internet. You have to talk about what you do and put it on Instagram.
Right. May 16th, 6 p.m.
Great. Thank you. The N train, no? That's
Yeah.
the train, yeah. All right, so I would love to open it up to you to ask questions about Bright Lines, about me, and we can use that to jump into the next phase. Yeah?
Okay, now, kind of, because I'm also thinking about writing a book, the type of book that I want to write is kind of similar to this in that it's not really a story about like some bold superpower person. It's kind of like an everyday thing.
Yeah.
But one of my concerns is that like my family will read it,
Mm-hmm.
and it's all, like, how did you deal with that? Because like you said, my family isn't very conservative, but they do have like some of their things where they like to be private. And so how do they respond to your book?
Shame is a very big thing for most of our families, right? Because your parents want you to have this semblance of being perfect and cool and everything's good and they're a virgin and they don't talk about bad things and they don't smoke and they don't drink and all this stuff, right? All these like things that are put on us. And I completely had that shame and that guilt of how can I be the writer that I am, the woman that I am, the person that I've become, and also not disrespect my family or hurt them or make them feel like they failed. The quick answer is you are not going to be able to keep them from feeling what they feel. They are probably going to be really worried and ashamed and afraid and feel scared for you expressing yourself with your truth. But that is the risk that the writer takes. And that is something that I completely feel like we can't underestimate how scary the truth is to large masses of people. And on some level, even if you're crafting fiction, you're exposing something that the world has not seen before, and that's destabilizing and scary to people. So you have to make that choice. You have to make an accord with yourself. Am I willing to put my life on the line, or am I going to keep silent? And I think being silent for too long actually ends up killing us in a deeper way than putting it out there. You know, the worst thing that can happen is your family is like embarrassed and ashamed of you and disowns you, which is horrible. But is it worse than you being a shadow of the creative person that you are, feeling like, what if I had written that book? I don't know. That always seemed worse to me than embarrassing my mom. And honestly, my mom ended up loving my book. So you never know. And she was like, it was very well written. And I think fiction allows her to see it a little bit more distantly than if it was like a nonfiction essay. Because when I write about, you know, my sex life or, you know, being someone who dealt with, you know, drug use in college or whatever it is, she's like, please wait until your dad's dead for you to write the memoir. Like, I don't want to like have him deal with this. So it's really scary to put yourself out there. I also think, you know, I'm from Bangladesh by the way of my parents, and people are dying there to just talk about things like atheism and, you know, women's rights. Like, people are being butchered by extremists, and for me, my silence is being complicit in the fear that those people are creating. Like, I feel like I have to say something because we can't let those people win, you know? And it's scary. I think my mom is literally, like, afraid for me to go there, you know, and be there. But that's one of the things that I kind of have made that choice. So, hope that helps. Anyone else? Any more questions? Yes?
So there's not a lot of writing or any media really on the South Asian LGBTQ+ community. So what was it like writing about that?
Well, the wonderful thing about New York City is when you are out of school and out of college, there's tons of queer Desi people out there. And I'm very close to many of them, and it was wonderful. And I think in the book you'll see like the social scenes of parties and stuff. You'll see this group of queer young people of color, not just South Asian, but their friends are coming from all over the world pretty much. I mean, that's the world that I wanted to be a part of when I moved to the city. So I kind of set it up that way. When I was in college, I had a conference and invited all these cool queer artists to be in the conference, and then I became friends with them when I graduated from college. So I blocked their friendship pretty much, but we're still friends. And you know, you see how challenging it is to be a queer artist of color. I don't want to say that this is easy, like this is your lifeblood, and rejection is a part of it. You know, when you have a world, and especially now, I mean, think about what you have to write about and look like and be like to get attention. I mean, it's very, very, very competitive to be a person who has a book or a film or a piece of art that they made in the world. And I think your community really is important, you know, when you are putting that out there. So my queer South Asian friends have read this book and have been like, I can't believe you were working on this. Like, they just are so stoked to see these like stories out there, you know. Anything else? Yes.
I saw on the back that you're the founder of a perfume and how did that influence like the more botanical parts of the book?
So that came out of the botanical parts of the book. So that's a great question. So how many of you would identify as being a hustler in any kind of way? Like you have hustles that you do? Yeah. So you have a side job, you have the things you want to do. So I'm totally like that kind of person, and I think when you grow up wanting things, you make sure that you can have a job or do whatever you want so you could dress the way you want or be the way you want. So for me, I've always wanted to set it up so like, I'm like, I like making perfume and candles, why not sell it and see what happens? Like it was very kind of strategic in that way, but also, how many of you have finished the book to the end? Okay, so for the little group that has finished back there, so the end, there's this image of like wildflowers and stuff. And if you think about that as like the end of one chapter of my life, the new beginning was this company. And the name of it is High Wildflower. So it's almost like psychically I extended some of the things I was exploring in this book into an actual living thing that kind of is a mirror to what Anwar is doing in his apothecary. Because when you write a book, you do a lot of research, and research is something that really got me interested in those types of things. So it came afterward, and now it's actually thriving. But I also have to warn you all, when you start a business, it takes time away from your art. So now I'm figuring out how to balance both, because I'm not always happy being a businesswoman, because I'm an artist. I'm supposed to be like a mess sometimes, and I can't ever be a mess now because I have to like, you know, handle my accounting. It's pretty unglamorous. So that's kind of the story of High Wildflower. Did you have a question?
So like when you started, like did you have like the idea of how like the book was going to turn out? Like how different is it the finished book from like the first thing that you ever had?
That's a great question. So my first version of this book actually took Elle and Charu 9 years later. So, you know, there's some massive tragedies that happen in the book. I won't spoil it if you haven't gotten there. But then it's like we see them and they're like, I'm an alcoholic and a nurse. That's Charu. And then Elle is like a smuggler who smuggles botanicals from India to Bangladesh. So I was like really in this like revolution smuggling story. It's so different. And then I basically sold the book to my editor at Penguin, and she was like, are you going to be okay with us cutting 150 pages of the story? And it was like, at first I was like, is this a deal with the devil? Like, am I like selling out right now? And then I was like, no girl, it's Penguin, go for it. So I just like went for it. And I'm actually glad with what it is, because it really focused and concentrated on that age that these young people were. You know, I wanted to force it to be like my age. So I was like, now they're in their late 20s and now I can really relate to them. And she was like, no, like what is this year in this family's life like? And that I think made it a more powerful story in the end. So sometimes you have to compromise your vision, but sometimes an editor, a lot of times an editor can see the vision even more. And there's this example that I think is so fascinating. Salman Rushdie had, have you read Midnight's Children? Any of you? Probably not. I mean, maybe the adults have, yeah. But he had another narrator, and his editor was like, we have to get rid of the narrator. Yeah, but it's like sometimes a major point in your novel will be the wrong way, because you're so close to something, you know, like, the closer you are to something, the harder it is to get distance. It's like being in love. So you want to separate to see what you really have.
So you're talking a little bit kind of about like editing and like the editing process, and I was wondering if like you've experienced or you've heard of like really big censorship in terms of literature, especially for literature that's not geared specifically as much towards like children and YA.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
Like, I was wondering like kind of to get a taste of like what that's like in the field.
Well, I think that's a great question too, and I actually wanted to write a book that could be like YA or like adult, because it's both, and you see Anwar's character is very adult, he's middle-aged, so I think that kind of takes it out of the YA category. But in terms of what young people can do in a book, I mean, Hunger Games are like killing people left and right, so it's not like we don't see things that are really illegal or taboo. And I think that's because the imagination of being a teenager, being a young person, is like you basically are unbound by anything that society is telling you. You don't give a shit. You know, you're fine with doing things that are taboo. And I think that's what's so fun about writing young characters, is like I'm very drawn to, it's like a mix of recklessness and fear and excitement about life that you can never get back as an adult. Like it's just, when you're 16, 17, 18, you're on the cusp of finding who you are, and I think that's something that YA has done really well. The thing with magicians and witches and werewolves and vampires, I mean, that's kind of going into, you know, fantasy and what we want the world to, like, what we wish the world could be like. And again, I think that goes along with this aspirational time. I don't know, I didn't really read any of those Twilight books. I saw the movies, but I always wonder, like, what makes them so popular? I mean, what do you guys think makes them so popular? What?
No, I didn't like Twilight.
Yeah, do we even like it? No,
I
wait.
think it's the whole love story between Bella and Jacob and everybody. I think that's what drawn everybody.
Right. Doesn't he end up with her daughter? I don't know. I'm like,
He kind of does, yeah.
I just think it's like what we think is YA and like what makes it or whatever, it's not necessarily the stuff that we think is really getting to it. I mean, to me, like the work that Sapphire is doing really gets into like darker sides of human life and existence, and that's really powerful to read. When I was in high school, I was reading Catcher in the Rye, A Separate Piece. I mean, I don't know. I was reading those kind of books. I didn't see myself in anything. It was like young white men. And there was even that girl, Marley, that's 11-year-old who like collected all these books about young people of color, young women of color. Because she's like, all books are about boys and dogs. And she was like on a mission to like, so I think the young people, even younger than you, are seeing like, how do I have a place in a story? You know, like what is valid about a story about a young queer South Asian or, you know, a young black woman? You know, like what are the things that we want to tell, the stories that we want to tell? And that's kind of like what's happening now. I think because of the proliferation of the internet and storytelling, it's more democratized. Yeah.
And then working with Penguin to get it published, did you feel like they cooperated and like helped you find the story you wanted to tell, or did you ever feel like they were kind of changing the story you wanted to tell?
I think I helped guide the story in a very, like I'm very type A, so, you know, if I felt like there was things being asked in the storyline, like one example might be when Charu is in Bangladesh and there's this like scene, you know, because she's having this weird moment with her uncle who's kind of like this unsavory character, and my editor was like, well, maybe she should talk about arranged marriage here, like her opinions on it, and it's like, she's not even thinking about marriage. It's not even we're not going in that direction, because that's what the thing, you know, we think of with South Asian characters is like arranged marriage and this and that, and it's like, I'm not playing that game. Like she's trying to figure out if the boy she had sex with likes her back, you know. It's very like, real, you know? So, I mean, are you all thinking about arranged marriages? No, like, it's not even a thing we're thinking about. So I was kind of like, she's 17, I don't think it's really on her mind. So those are the little ways that I kind of vouched. And then the book cover was a huge thing. I've actually written about this. And the book cover I had before this cover had a girl who was kind of like, you know, there's a baby blue background, she was wearing pink and white, and she had, you know, brown skin, and I was like, wow, this is like a book that even a teenager wouldn't want to read. Like, I was like, this shit is not cool. Like, and my boyfriend was like, I wouldn't read this on the subway, I gotta be honest with you. I'm like, no, this is like #1 like, New Yorker nightmare. Like, people don't want to read your book on the subway because they're too embarrassed. It's like, you know, when you're just like, and this is real. Like, this writers think about this stuff. Like, I had a really good friend whose book had like a white woman in a beach hat on her cover, which felt like such a, like, you know, getting chick-litted, you know, like you're getting forced into this box because you're a feminine, like, woman. So for me, I basically created this vision board and was like, look, I think silhouettes are cool, I think rainbows are cool, I think let's play with some of the things and make it more epic and mythic and creative and not so literal. Because to put a brown body on a book cover, we all know what that kind of does to the book, right? Yeah. And how many of you feel like you're so much more than just your like racial identity or your gender identity or your sexuality? Like, you're more than just those things, right? Identity is it's like these boxes that we've made. So I wanted this to kind of be like, you see this cover and the hair could be a hijab, it could be charu. Ella's psychedelic visions are in the rainbow. Like, there's a lot of things that are embedded in the cover that, you know, I had a hand in, because I was not happy with that other cover, and I was very vocal about it, because I was like, I didn't work 10 years on this to, like, have a bad cover. 10 years, yeah, it takes a long time. And especially when you're in your teens and 20s thinking about a book, you have a lot of stuff to go through before you have the discipline to sit down and lock yourself away, I think. Yeah.
I have a question kind of like about, it's about race, because like one of my concerns is that people won't want to read it, not because like, yeah, kind of because I'm not like exoticized, I'm Guyanese and nobody knows what that is, let alone where it is, and it's not Ghana, it's Guyana. But like, one of my favorite things about the book is that it doesn't pause to kind of explain things, it kind of just says them as a matter of factly. Like, did you ever get any like shit for that? Because like, I feel like was there ever anyone who said, oh, maybe you need to explain this part of your culture, or
Sure.
kind of talk about arranged marriage?
Sure. I mean, this book goes into a war that most Americans don't know about. Most Pakistani people don't know about. That has to be explained, you know. I think Guyana has a very rich history because there are so many types of people living in Guyana that are of Indian descent, of African descent, and that has been a source of so much tension and art and beauty. I mean, there's so much there historically to play with. And people should know that Guyana is not Ghana and Guyana is in South America, not an island, or whatever, you know, like, there are these details that you might have to explain because the assumption is a white person who doesn't know anything is reading your book. Sure. Does that mean you shouldn't write the book you want? No. You know, I won't even say, like, you know, what's a bestseller? I think the books that are bestsellers are doing something that kind of appeals to the lowest common denominator of people. So, for how many of you have seen Lemonade? Beyonce's I'm like, you know, Lemonade. So Beyonce's doing things that are visually very complex and have a lot of feminist motifs. There's a lot of African American motifs. She has a lot of things she's not saying, but she's saying visually through her music. It's appealing to a lot of different types of people, but it's still very, very beautiful art, you know, and it's really taking this experience and making it palatable for a large swath of people. And I think that is something beautiful that art can do. So I know reading about some of the things in this book is probably hard for some people of Bangladeshi descent or confusing. You know, I've read reviews on like Goodreads, which it's just a very fun activity to do when you're bored at home because people are like sad, I don't know. And you just see like people, this one woman, she looked like an older white woman from the Midwest, and she was kind of like, these characters were harder for me to get into at first than the fantasy books that I love. And I think it's so interesting that people can get into like Game of Thrones, no problem, and these people are all not from the world we live in. And then if you write about, Guyanese people, it's like, where's that? Is that an island? Is that in Africa? And you're like, this is so sad. So I think that is kind of the uphill battle that we as writers of color are up against, but there's many uphill battles you're up against. So it seems to me to write it would give it shed some light on it. It's empowering. Yeah.
I wanted to hear you talk more about your family and how your decisions to write fiction versus nonfiction, and how maybe you were talking about how it was more palatable for your mother, or she was more receptive than you thought reading a work of fiction than nonfiction, and how as you created this novel and continue to write fiction, I'm assuming, how you think about your mother continuing to read, or an aunt, or maybe someone who is fictionalized in the story, and this fear, well, I'll just have to wait till they die, but I'm not going to wait. This old woman could live 25 more years, and then I'll be old too. So what's your thoughts about offending someone or alienating them if they ever read your fiction?
I think it's a great question. I honestly don't care at all about offending people because...
I was hoping you'd say that.
Yeah, I don't care. Like, I care if I'm mean to you and I offend you, but not if I wrote something. So that's number one, is I have to be true to myself. And just to get like deep here, I wrote a piece for Vice about traveling to Bangladesh and really being aware of being a woman and feeling safe or unsafe in specific situations that I was in, and being assaulted when I was in high school. So that was something that like really got triggered for me, because I was like, oh, whoa, like everyone's telling me I can't wear this, I can't go there, I can't do this, and I feel like it's like that rehashing this horrible moment in my 15-year-old life. But now I'm 31, so it's like, whoa, this is crazy. So for me, I had to write about that when I wrote that piece, and I could have just been a travelogue about being in Bangladesh, but honestly, when I was on a bus at 1 a.m., I was thinking about that girl in Delhi who got raped on that bus at 1 a.m. And I have to write that, and I have to connect it to my own experience, and I called my mom, and it always gets really dark and sad, and she's like, you have to write this? And I was like, I have to write it. And she was really upset and was like, why can't you just not like wait? She just really doesn't want my father to read it. And I think a lot of young women in here probably know, it's not even like, if you have your two parents, you'll notice that the men are always getting protected from the shameful things that might happen to you. And it's like, for them, it's like, my dad might have a heart attack and pass away because he read this thing on the internet. Which is like, he's not going to read everything on the internet, because that's not what he does. It's not happening. So anyway, Vice published this piece, and that's a huge platform. So I'm like ready to get commentary. And the number one commentary that I will get that's negative is often from South Asian men that are like, shut up, you're a whore. It just like gets really negative immediately. But then she shared it, my mother shared it with her group of female bloggers, and they all started sharing survivor stories, and she was like transformed by it. And they were like, wow, like I feel like so happy that I can share this with everyone. And then my mom came around and was like, your dad should know this, he should read this. She didn't share it with him because she's not ready to do that, and that's not my job, that's like up to her. So I think there's room for growth and change in our family that I didn't really think about. And it goes back to what you're saying, is like, what if it really hurts him? It does really hurt her, because her number one thing is, I failed you, I'm a horrible mother. Which for a mother is like the worst feeling, is to feel like a horrible mother. So I think I write very openly about that time in my life, because I think high school is really confusing, and you are doing things that like, sometimes you're like, this was a mistake. And yeah, those mistakes that you feel like you make will have repercussions forever, but not in the way that we think. There is a redemption there. And I think through writing, I've found that kind of redemptive experience, but also just my relationship with my mother is much stronger. She's like seeing me for the first time, you know, because I couldn't tell her that stuff when I was 15. I was afraid of her, but now she's afraid of me.
So it sounds like two things. We underestimate the people our parents or our family or authority figures are, and that it's our fear really that's speaking, not them.
Absolutely, and our fear of judgment. Honestly, I don't know how you do it. Are you guys on Snapchat and all this stuff? Oh my gosh, it kills me. This kills me. Like I think I'm just the generation that does like technology is still stupid in some ways to me. But it terrifies me that you are like documenting your every move in a cool way because you have to seem so fresh and cool, and that's gotta be a ton of pressure. Like I don't know. I would say like turn off the noise because it is getting in the way. It is getting in the way of creativity. Like, it's almost like we've made creativity this thing that anyone can do, but you can't just do creativity like that. You know, you can't just say, hey guys, this is me at the gym. Hey guys, this is, you know, that's showing, you know, and you're showing off really. And what you really want to do is be in the moment and actually like not try to document the moment, not be outside of the moment to show the moment. Like, you want to be living the moment. So there's times when I see something beautiful, I'm like, I want to Instagram this so bad. But I'm like, no, just look at it. So you're not looking at it through some filter, you know? Like, we've forgotten what real things look like, I think, because it's very filtered. So for me, I always think about storytelling as something that there's like the easy, instant way to do it, and then there's like the hard, painful way to do it. Yes?
Yeah, so just like you were talking about being in Bangladesh and traveling, and then you published this article for Vice magazine about like things that were coming out from your like teenage years and everything. And then you were saying like things about social media and like wanting to like share what you're doing. And I was wondering if like that article started out as like a journal entry, something for yourself, and then like you decided to get it published, and kind of just like the writing process and how it exists for you outside publication, and like if when you were writing your novel, publication was an end goal, or you were just writing like for yourself, and how those two like.
That's a great question. Do we write for ourselves or do we write to get published? So I will say I'm a writer that writes to get published because I want the platform and I want my voice to get heard, and I want to get paid for writing. Like I want to professionalize it, and there's no shame in that. So own it. If you want to get paid for something you're good at doing, get paid for it because you deserve it. That's the world we live in. Do I write for myself in my journal? Yes, I do. And I think there's like the analog version of what you can do, and then there's like writing for the internet. And that piece did start off with me sketching out these different moments with women that I met on my travels. So the thing with a country like Bangladesh is everyone is like, oh, okay, everyone looks like me there. But that's not true. There's a whole bunch of people from indigenous communities that may look more Thai or Burmese, or you know, they look different from what we think of as Bangladeshi. And I actually have written a lot about the particular community, the Khasi community, in this novel. So part of it was researching and taking notes. And it wasn't just notes on like the things I was researching that were like big macro level things. It was also like the scent in the air, the type of trees that were growing, like just documenting the world around me. And for me, that's something that really gave me a sense of grounding the story and working with my two hands, which I think, again, digital stuff, like, it's very instantaneous and you're thinking about the internet. So like for that piece for Vice, I think the first title that I had was a very feminist sounding title called A World of One's Own, as a hat tip to Virginia Woolf.
Yeah.
And then the editor was like, what about No Country for Young Women? And I was like, what? I was so offended. I was like, I need a day. Like, I need a day to think about this. I'm so offended right now. And I actually ended up going with his title because A, it doesn't just mean Bangladesh, it means all countries where young women are struggling and being forced to struggle. And I thought that was interesting. And I think that like finding out the tone of where you're writing for. Vice is very dark and comedic and kind of irreverent and bro-ish and all this stuff. And that's the audience. So there's these little moments where you kind of have to make decisions and sell out. And if you've noticed, I mean, every article you read is like, how to do X, or that, you know, it's always like this tone that didn't exist when we were reading stuff online or in newspapers. So I feel like, for me, it's going with the times, but also realizing whatever I write in my journal might make its way to get published, but I do want my work to get published. This is my career, so I'm cool with that, you know, there's no shame in that. It's not like writing in your journal forever, you know, no one's gonna know about it unless you put it out there, you know? Yes?
I wanted to go back to some of your comments about editing and the cover. At what point, when you have that interaction with the editor, at what point do you feel that you concede to their experience, or do you stand your ground and say, no, I want it this way?
Well, the question becomes, can they see my experience? So I felt like, for me, I almost felt misunderstood in this really deep way, and I wanted to, you know, as you said, stand my ground, because, you know, we've spent 2.5 years working on this book together, and, you know, I feel like I'm a cool person. I'm not someone who would read the book with the cover that I got, and I wanted to really kind of make my point of view very firmly known. So I I did my research, you know, I listed authors who had written about racial topics who had gotten abstract covers. So there was one book that I cited where they were talking about race, and a guy actually changes his race, but the cover was like geometric triangles, nothing to do with the racialized body. So for me, it's not just me taking the fight on individually, it's this legacy of authors of color having, you know, books with covers. But, you know, for the South Asian, it's like the woman and the sari and the veil for the Muslim woman, and the acacia trees for the African writer. I mean, this is like a problem with the publishing world that we have to stand our ground on and not get swept up in. So for me, I'm like, you can try to play me with this horrible cover, or you can work with me and get a fabulous cover, which we did. And I actually think that it's not something that's easy to do, you know, like, it's challenging and it's destabilizing to go against authority, as we all know, especially the young people in this room. But if you really believe in something, you have to go against authority. Because it's your name, it's my name on it, you know? So if my name was on something that I thought was corny, I would be ashamed of it. And that would be so sad, to be ashamed of the one thing I've worked on for most of my adult life. Yes?
When you said like you wrote a piece for Vice, and you said you just felt like you needed to write this, and you had the conversation with your mother, did you feel the same way about the book? Like, how did you get into the mindset of writing the whole thing? Because I know writers, they every time they write a piece, they're like, will this appeal to a whole bunch of readers? Will they understand where I'm coming from?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I definitely had talks with my mother. I got into therapy, which really helps when you're struggling with stuff. And I know that, like, people have different views on therapy. But one of my big things that I needed to tackle is I'm about to share a huge part of myself with the world, and I don't know if I'm strong enough to do it. And I really needed to be strong enough to do it. And the way that we, you know, kind of deal with not feeling strong is escape, right? Drugs, alcohol, sex, like, these are ways that people escape as adults. I'm sure you've seen or know whatever about that. So for me, that's what I was doing to kind of dull the fear, like we were talking about, fear of sharing my story. Even if it's fiction, it's still like slicing, you know, myself open and be like, here are the wounds, like, drink, you know, take from me. And honestly, that's part of the gift of writing, is once you're done with this, it belongs to other people. It doesn't belong to me anymore. So people can be like, this is the worst book I've ever read in my life, and I don't actually care. Because I already did that. It's like, been there, done that. I'm moving on, you know? So I think for my mother, she sees it as like, this is a part of who you were, and now you're working on something new. And that's part of life. It's like, you let it go after you're done with it. This will always be a part of who I am, but it's not who I am this very moment. It's who I was. Yes?
So I see in your dedication you wrote for my water, fire, earth, ma, and Platon, and prompt. So I want to like ask, like, in what ways did the book, like, what ways did you feel like dedicating this book to them?
So those are my parents and my sister. and I'm into astrology, so that was an astrological reference. Because my dad's a Leo, my mom's a Scorpio, and my sister's a Taurus. But I think I wanted to say it like that, as a joke to my love of astrology, but also I just see them as being so, they're very foundational people in their own way. Like, my dad is like this fiery hothead. My mom is like this emotionally nurturing person, and my sister is like just grounded. And if you think about the elements of fire, water, and earth, I mean, it's like they embody that. And I'm a Libra, so I'm like air. I'm just always like in my thoughts. So for me, they kind of like create this protective circle around me, and it makes me feel like I can just be whatever I want, and I try to give that to them, Because the thing that I've learned so much about my family is, especially my parents, is they are not scared of change. I mean, they're immigrants. They freaking came from a war-torn country to America with nothing. Like, they learned how to do all this stuff that I can only imagine doing in another country where I don't really know the language that well. Like, my dad knew English, my mom had to learn English. So for me, they're very much an elemental source of strength for me, and I wanted to acknowledge that. Like, these are the people who made me who I am. Like, without them, I would be nothing. So that's why they're in there. Yes?
You said you wrote the book over a course of 10 years. As time went on, did you feel, because as a change as a person throughout the years, so did you feel that, did you have self-conflict with yourself on whether you want to change what you want to write or change your ideas and views?
Such a great question. Yes. Oh my gosh. And you feel like the biggest loser when something takes 10 years. I felt like such a loser. Like, people are like, oh, you're still working on that book, huh? Like, everyone is always shaming you until you get published, which is like so messed up. Because you're like, geez, guys, this is like my first book. But honestly, that is such a great question because yes, you do change so much. It is helpful that a big chunk of the book was talking about adolescent characters. So for me, that's a looking back moment. And like I said, I worked as a youth organizer at Make the Road, New York, and my students were all 14, I was 21. They're all grown-ups now. They're like 25, 26. They're like doing their thing. I'm still friends with them, but it's like crazy now we hang out as friends because they're adults. But this book is really connected to those memories of that past. And there's a lot of history in there. So I could really retreat into some of the things when I felt destabilized by my own changes in how historically located it is. It's a work of realism, which makes it like you have to abide by the truth. And the truth is something that is so hard to do in fiction because nothing is true in fiction. But it has to feel believable if it's a work of realism. For me, the ultimate goal was, I want these young people to end this novel surviving. And what we hope is that they are thriving once you get to the end, you'll see that it ends on a note that I think in realism, which is often very deadly for people of color, especially women of color, that there is a semblance of living and continuing on and summoning the strength to be, what you're meant to be. And that's kind of what let me survive the process of writing the book. Is like, I'm gonna get to the end, and I'm gonna survive this, because this is the worst thing I've ever tried to do in my life. So, and as far as it goes, writing is not really the worst life, because there's a lot harder things happening in the world. So any writer who's like, this is the hardest thing, no, it's not the hardest thing.
We have time for one more question.
One more, oh no, okay, we haven't talked, right?
No.
Okay.
So most of us are in a creative writing class, and I've noticed that self-doubt is really apparent whenever anyone goes to share something. Like, people will introduce their writing, like even on the class level, by saying like, oh, this isn't any good, but anyway. So I'm just wondering, like, how do you push past the self-doubt and decide that something you've written is good or like worth reading, and how do you like get to that state of mind where you're willing to like push something that you have written and like genuinely believe that it's worth reading?
That is an amazing question. All of your questions have been amazing, so I was warned about this, but it's actually true. Okay, crippling self-doubt. That is, on one level, very healthy for a writer. So you want to always have a sense of doubt, because you're not perfect. But crippling self-doubt, where you introduce a work that you made as, this is shitty, don't read it, and it sucks, Not good. So how do we do that? There's a couple of ways, is to remind yourself that everything is a work in progress, and you workshopping with your fellow creative writing students is acknowledging that this is a work in progress. It's not finished, perfect work. And honestly, like, to get your writing to that next level, you are going to work with an editor to get you to that next level. You're the writer, you're the artist and talent. You're supposed to go all over the place so that your class can kind of guide you. I did my MFA at Brooklyn College, which, you know, I went there because I could work and I could still go there at night. You know, it was very convenient for my life, and I could afford it because it's CUNY. But what I realized was when I was workshopping, some of the things that I thought were like fundamentally clear and beautiful about my writing, people would just like take a big dump on it. And I'd be like, wait, I just got dissed by like someone who has no idea, who's writing about like skiing or fishing or like stuff that has nothing to do with what I'm writing about. Like, I'm writing about the city and like being a young person, being an immigrant, and all this stuff. So people aren't gonna necessarily get what you're doing, and that's when the voice that says what I'm doing is exactly what I need to be doing needs to sing louder than the self-doubt. It's always gonna be a dance between crippling self-doubt and feeling serendipity. And that's the thing that I actually want you to really walk away with, is this feeling of serendipity is kind of very unique to the artist, is when you meet someone and you're like, I'm supposed to be meeting you right now. And everything you're saying is like teaching me something right now. Or you see a sign, or you know, happen to get into the wrong cab, but then you end up at the cool party. Whatever it is, it's like, you just have to be open to serendipity. So sometimes in your workshop, be open, and maybe someone will say something to you that will like click. And other times you have to shed. And I don't know if there's a rule for that, but I do think you have to go inside and into it and like really be in touch with what you're doing. And if you believe in what you're doing, like I believe in this story, I wasn't getting deals from 500 publishers or whatever. I didn't have people knocking at my door. This is straight to paperback. This isn't even a hardcover into paperback. So you might not know anything about publishing, but usually you have these two life cycles. You have a paperback that comes after a hardcover. This is like having half of a life cycle for a book. But we're still talking about it, and it was published last August. So you never know what your little idea can become. I think it's like you have to just persevere in that idea. And conflict is good, and conflict makes you stronger. And if you do an MFA program, you're going to deal with people that are very rude about your writing. And honestly, this is like where the thick skin comes into place, because no one can tell the story that you can tell. Thank you, guys.
Thank you all so much. Luckily, it's not over yet, because now you get to have your one-on-one chance to meet Tanwi Nandini Islam. So she's going to head back there to the round table to be signing books. And then I think we're going to do Bard first, because you're the bigger group. And then we'll do Park Slope Collegiate. And so while you're waiting, you can read, you can chat, but do remember we've got a library upstairs, so we don't want it to get... I mean, it's fine to be chatting in here, we just don't want to be chatting.
Yes.
Maybe that's the problem I have with the middle school.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Oh my God, thank you. What's your name?
Ezra.
Ezra. And you guys are very good at writing and teaching?
Yeah.
Oh, we're going to so great.
You were wonderful.
Yeah.
They've really got into it.
I think you never
No, they're tough. You should have heard them on Hemingway.
This guy's got